but.
Hi, and welcome to the Cheer Up Podcast. I am your host, Kara Hunt, and with me is the sweet, as always, Sherry Swalwell. Sherry Saintly Sweet, sweet and saintly. I like that better. Sherry Sweet and Saintly Swalwell. How are you doing today, Sherry?
Lots of friends who would not agree with you on that one, but thank you. I will take it. I will take it.
Oh my goodness. And thank you, everyone who has joined us again this week for the Cheer Up Podcast. We thank you so much for joining us every week, for tuning in every week, for downloading every week. And for those of you who have not had the chance to download and subscribe, can we just ask that you do that? If you're listening on one of the various podcasting platforms right now, can you just hit that like button really quick if there is one, or subscribe button or download button? All of that helps us in the algorithm for those who want to listen to positive Christian podcasting. So that would help us a lot. And if you've been blessed by the podcast, please share it. Let your friends know about it. That also helps us out in the algorithm for those who may be looking just for, joyful, inspirational, a little bit of funny, a podcast, and so if you share it and if you've been blessed by it, and if it's even brought you a little bit of joy on your journey to joy, then could you just please share it? And we would greatly appreciate that. You just have no idea how much. And we want to say welcome and hi to different nations, different countries, the Germany, Nepal, Canada, the UK, Australia, Chile, the Netherlands. We just want to say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for some of you are tuned in so many times. We just want to say thank you, and definitely thank you to our South American friends. Our downloads and listeners from there is growing. We have people from cities that are in other countries that I don't know which country they're from. So please forgive me. There's one from Kathmandu, Bagmati province, another from Woodford Green, Redbridge, and I know what Sydney, New South Wales is, and Santiago Metropolitan. I think that may be Chile. But anyway, for all of those who continue to tune in nationwide and worldwide, we just want to say thank you. We want to personally say hi, and thank you for tuning in every week when you can, and for just always supporting us. So thank you. Okay, for those who have been listening for the past couple of weeks, we've been going through biblical figures. We've been going through biblical figures. And this week, we are going to do Paul. Am I right, Sherry? We are going to do Paul. And I can't wait to hear what Sherry is going to talk to us today about the Apostle Paul. That's correct. Am I right, Sherry? For some reason, I have a hard time relating him to an apostle. I don't know why. But yeah, so she's going to talk to us a little bit today about the Apostle Paul. So what do you want to share with us today, Sherry, about Paul?
Well, I am super excited. I asked Kara if I could talk about Paul because he is like the exact opposite of who I am as far as personality and things like that go. And I always in the past was really intimidated by Paul. And to be honest with you, I kind of still feel intimidated by Paul. So I'm not sure how I'm going to greet him up in heaven. Like, I don't know if I'm going to stand back behind people and be like, don't yell at me, because he just seems like a very intense person. But the more you read about Paul and the more I've read about Paul, the more I actually one, highly respect him, but two, kind of have grown to love him a little bit, like an uncle in a way. So I don't know what you know about Paul or what you don't, but there's a couple things that I want to highlight about him. Number one, he was a Jew. And if I say anything, if I get anything wrong, interrupt me, Kara. But I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty sure I've got it right. But if I do go off course, hit me. Well, not hit me, but interrupt me. But you can't hit me, people, because we're not even in the same room. But but you can't interrupt.
I could throw tomatoes. No, go ahead.
Here we go. So Paul was a Jew. And he was a very learned scholar. So he knew what he was talking about. He knew the Bible up and down. He knew the Torah. He knew all of the biblical teachings. You could liken him in that regard to Jesus, as far as he studied the Bible religiously. He knew it in and out, upside down, all the way around. But he also was a very mean person. I wouldn't say that he did not have the Holy Spirit in him. He did not have, he had not accepted Jesus into his heart. He did not have a relationship with God. He was all about religion. And he actually was, what is the word that I want? He is responsible for the stoning of Stephen. And Stephen was the first believer who was martyred because of being stoned. And so, and it says in the Bible, when it talks about the stoning of Stephen, in fact, I have it right here. Hold on. Oh, I have it right here. I had two different passages that I wanted to talk about. But in the stoning of Stephen, it talks about somebody was standing. Here we go. While they were stoning him, Stephen prayed. Well, sorry, let me back up just a minute. I'm so excited to talk about Paul that I'm tripping over my own words. But anyway, Stephen was stoned. Saul. Okay, so Paul was named Saul when he was the Jewish leader, and he did not have a relationship with God. It was all about religion for him. His name was Saul. And so it says, the stoning of Stephen, it's really short. I'm just going to read it. It's 54. It's Acts 7:54 to 59. When the members of the Sanhedrin heard this, they were furious and gnashed their teeth at him. But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Look, he said, I see heaven open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. At this, they covered their ears. This is the Sanhedrin people, and yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed at him, dragged him out of the city, and began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. That is Paul, the Apostle Paul, and he was the one who instigated, coordinated, got Stephen martyred. While they were stoning him, Stephen prayed, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Then he fell on his knees and cried out, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. When he had said this, he fell asleep. And Saul approved of their killing him. That is the very first sentence of chapter 8, but the very last sentence of the incident where he was stoned. One thing that I want to point out, even though we're talking about Saul turned to Paul today, I want to point out Stephen's story, him being stoned, is really an encouragement to me. I know you're going to be like, well, that's really weird, Sherry. How is that an encouragement? But it's an encouragement to me because the Bible tells us how Jesus was right there with him, how God was right there with him. There is no way that we should be afraid. I mean, there's the typical human fear. I get that, of the unknown. And nobody, I don't think, wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I want to be a martyr today. I want to be tortured and killed. And that's how I want to die and go to heaven. So at the end of the day, I'm going to be in heaven. But until then, woohoo, this is going to be fun. Nobody says that. But the thing that I just want to kind of have people tuck in the back of their head is that God is with us. If that happens to be our mission and that happens to be our assignment, and that's what God's plan is for our lives, we don't have to worry because God is going to be right there with us the whole entire time. He never leaves us or forsakes us. He will be right there. And that is something that is really comforted me. I don't want to say encouraged me because I don't really want to think about having to go through anything like that, but it has really comforted me. So I know we're talking about Paul today, but I really wanted to talk about that part. Well, anyway, chapter 9. So Stephen was martyred in chapter 7, the end of chapter 7. So there's only one more chapter in between. And then in chapter 9, Saul is on the road to Damascus. And a lot of people have heard of his story, of his testimony, but he was on the way to Damascus. God strikes him blind. And then he ends up being, I think he fasted for 3 days. When God blinded him, he said, the Lord called to him in a, no, sorry, I got to go up a little bit because that's the part I want to talk about. So as he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. This is Saul. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. So Saul knew right away who he was talking to. He knew that from the beginning, even though he didn't know more about him, but he knew who was doing the talking. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. So he stayed in the city for 3 days blind, and he didn't eat or drink anything. So he did fast in the city for 3 days. Well, then, while he's in the city for those 3 days, fasting and praying and blind, God calls out to Ananias. And Ananias is a disciple. And it says, in Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision. Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. Now, see the difference right there already? So Saul had to ask, who are you, Lord? And Ananias, he knew who he was right away. So we're talking religion versus relationship. Ananias already had a relationship with God, and he knew his voice. He says, yes, Lord, he answered. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. So this Ananias, he wants to obey God because that's what he's in a relationship with God, and he wants to obey God because he's in this relationship with God. But Saul had a reputation, and his reputation was, I'm going to kill believers. I'm going to kill Christians, disciples, blah, blah, blah. So Ananias was like, really, God? Like, are you sure this is what I have to do? And he says, Lord, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priest to arrest all who call on your name. But the Lord said to Ananias, so this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim my name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. And that is the part that I wanted to read to everybody. So God has a mission for all of us. God has a purpose and a plan for all of us. And I used to think to myself, and again, if I'm wrong in this, Kara, let me know and interrupt me. But I don't think that God sits there and punishes people necessarily for their choices, but at the same token, I believe that God allows us to have consequences for our actions and for our choices. And so I've always wondered, Paul had such a huge ministry after he became Paul. So he was Saul at first. He tortured, persecuted, was absolutely horrid to believers in his early life before he was converted. And then Paul became such an amazing minister, apostle. He knew who God was. His conversion was real, and he was not afraid to speak the truth in love. And I always wondered, I'm like, so how is it that he just kind of gets off scot-free? Well, anybody who chooses to be a believer, anybody who chooses to cross that line from religion to relationship, to really, truly have a relationship with God, doesn't get off scot-free. In fact, the study notes in my Bible talk about faith in Christ brings great blessings, which is so true. I mean, there is no other way that I would want to live than to be a believer, but often great suffering too. Paul would suffer for his faith, And then it tells us to see 2 Corinthians 11:23-27. So I switched over to 2 Corinthians 11, and it says this. It says, are they servants of Christ? So whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool. This is Paul talking. I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. So basically, Paul, so I always grew up knowing that the Apostle Paul, after his conversion on the road to Damascus, he became this great, wonderful teacher. He made tents, and then he preached also so that he didn't have to have other people like support his ministry. He did all of these things, and I always thought, okay, so it talks about him going to prison, but he writes all these books, these epistles from the New Testament in prison. So he must have been in the country club prison, not the real prison. But no, they direct me over to 2 Corinthians 11, and it tells us what kind of stuff that he went through, and he suffered greatly for his faith. And you know what? He never once stood down, or he never once compromised, or he never once changed his mind. And he also is famous, I don't remember where in the Bible it says this, but he's also famous for saying, I am content to live in little, I'm content to live in much. I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been everything in between. I've been starving, I've had too much to eat, and yet still I'm content in whatever position or place that God places me in. So the Apostle Paul is pretty amazing. He hated God, but yet killed people in the name of God, quote unquote, because he was this Jewish scholar, part of the Sanhedrin. So he was part of the upper people in the Jewish culture. But yet when he became a believer, There was like no going back. And that I want to have, I don't really want to live the life that Paul lived, to be honest with you. I don't want to be flogged, and I don't want to go to jail and stuff like that. Would I? Yes, if I had to. But I just have so much respect for him. But whenever I think of Paul, I think of the phrase, he spoke the truth in love. Like, he loved people so much that he didn't care what culture said. He didn't care what the popular thing was. He didn't want people to go to hell. And so he spoke the truth in love, even if it hurt, even if it wasn't what people wanted to hear. And in that regard, I totally respect Paul and can't wait to meet him. But in the other token, he spoke the truth in love. So what's he going to say to me up in heaven? Sherry, ... I don't really want that. But then again, I'm half kidding, because I know up in heaven, it's not going to be like that. We're going to all be perfect. The tears are washed away. All of our reunions and so forth with people are going to be amazing. So I'm half kidding about that. But I don't know. He was a very intimidating person, but man, oh man, he was on fire for God. And you knew when you had an encounter with him, who he loved, who he served, and who his master was. And so that's my impression of Paul in a nutshell. So what do you want to say about Paul?
What is there not to say about Paul? Because he, despite some things that I'm like, really, Paul, At times, boy, has he always been one of my top people that I've always said I can't wait to meet when I get to heaven, because his ministry just speaks to me. I can't read the book of Philippians, for example, without having a renewed strength or renewed faith, right? This was a man, and Sherry, you touched on this, who had been so badly beaten, who had been so flogged, who had been so imprisoned. And we're not talking, like you said, country club prisons. We're talking like sewer like prisons in chains, you know. But yet, okay, so I don't, okay, like for example, my husband plays guitar. And when you play the guitar a lot, you get calluses on your fingers, right? But they actually help you play longer, I mean, better, like in the long run. And I guess the same thing could be said about anything, like people who use garden tools a lot, or, and things like that. Your skin becomes a little bit tougher. And it seems like with everything the enemy threw at him, or in every prison he found himself in, or every time he found himself in chains, he got stronger. He got tougher. He got bolder. So it was almost as if every test, and I don't even know if I can use the word test, like everything that he went through that was almost meant to break him made him stronger. And I think it's like that's gold. I forgot what gold is called, but it's like gold, right, Sherry? Isn't gold the one that's refined under fire? Oh no, that's a diamond.
Oh yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
gold, I don't know what else gold does, but yeah, that is a diamond. You're right.
Yes, and it's like it's refined, right? Under fire. And I'm just like, boy, if there was ever anyone who was refined under fire, it was him. I mean, he grew thick skin. He had the scars to prove everything that he went through. And it didn't deter him. It didn't stop him. And like you mentioned, Sherry, I don't think any of us seek out and say, you know what, I'm going to be a martyr and I just want all these things to happen to me. No, of course not. We're human. We don't desire that at all. And I don't even think Paul ever desired that. He just went where he was led to go by God, by the Holy Spirit, he did what he was supposed to do. And as a result of that, he found himself in some very dangerous, some very precarious situations. But he persevered. He persevered. And it was like every flogging, he got stronger. Every time he was in prison, it just made him more determined. And he did. And when you think about him, and I'm just going to use David for a quick example from the Old Testament. David was a mighty warrior. And I mean, the things he done is beyond explanation, the way God was able to use him and his heart towards God. But David was he kind of whined about his situations a little bit. You can go to the book of Psalms, and he would just say, oh, Lord, why have you closed your eyes to me or your ears to me and things like that, right? Sherry, you correct me if I'm wrong. Paul doesn't do that, does he?
Well, that goes right. That goes right into the next point that I was thinking about Paul is that God created him tough from day one. Because
he's tough.
God knew what his purpose was before Paul even knew what his purpose was. Like, yes. God creates certain people in this world to be able to withstand stuff that would break the majority of people. And in that regard, I have so much, what is the word I want? Respect. I have so much respect for Paul because he fulfilled the purpose that God created in him before he was even born.
he was tough. He had thick skin. Um, and I'm not going to go as far to say that he didn't care that those things were happening to him. Excuse me, that's not the word I'm looking for. That he wasn't in pain. That's the word I'm looking for. That he wasn't in pain, and that he physically suffered from that, but he wasn't a complainer.
Right.
He just wasn't. And he may have felt those things. I mean, again, he's only human. We do not worship Paul. He's only human. But I don't think it was in his nature. So it goes,
right.
I don't think it's in his nature to complain. Right.
He was kind of like the modern day or the old fashioned day Rambo.
Yes, exactly. He just kind of, he kept on going. And not only did he keep going, he praised the Lord in the process.
Amen.
He praised God in the process. And it's just, I don't know, because you can't help but read through Paul's whole entire journey, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the very ugly. And you ask yourself, oh goodness, Lord, would I be able to sustain that? Like, would I be able to just brush it all off and just keep my eyes focused on you like Paul did? It's something we have to ask ourselves. And only God knows the truth, right? Only God knows the truth. I, for instance, could say, oh, Lord, I would never do that. Never, never, never. Kind of like Peter, right? When he was like, I would never deny you. And then later he did. Or I could say, oh, Lord, I'll never be able to do that. Don't put me in a position like that. And he's like, what are you talking about? You've passed with flying colors. You'll come through. And so none of us really know except God. And I think all we can do is just just ask God, Lord, whatever may come, just give me the strength that I need to be able to get through whatever comes my way. Just give us the strength to get through it and for me to accomplish your will in that situation. And I think that's what I learned about Paul. That's just one of the things. I feel like I've learned about Paul. He's so resilient. It's one of the words I just want to I think emphasize. He was just resilient. He was one tough cookie. And he was one tough cookie, and he never lost focus. He just kept the path. He just kept going. He just kept going. I think that's the word. That's what I would like to leave readers with, is to just, no matter how down it looks, no matter how hopeless it looks, because while he's writing these epistles in prison, he didn't know if he was going to ever get out or not.
Right.
I'm pretty sure he hoped he would, but he didn't know. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. He was going to still do what he felt like the Lord had called, that he had been called to do, and he just kept the faith, and he just kept going. And again, one of the things that really stands out to me is that he just did not complain. That, to me, and I keep emphasizing that because I'm not sure I could have done the same thing. I'm not sure.
I think it's because he kept his focus on God, and he kept his focus on the mission. Like I honestly believe that people who have either not grown up in a Christian environment with Christian parents and a Christian upbringing, or people who have strayed and then come back, I honestly think that they have a deeper appreciation for their relationship with God, because they know what it is to not have it. And
absolutely.
I can't stop thinking about when Paul was shipwrecked, and I believe you'd have to read the story yourself because I don't know if I have all the details right. But I believe that like God had told him ahead of time, this is what's going to happen. This is what I want you to do. This is, kind of like those 007 movies, or the like Get Smarter, the Mission Impossible. I guess it's the Mission Impossible. Dun, 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 dun. This is what's going to happen to you, Paul. These are the, because God, I think we've learned from all of the different Bible stories that we have read about that God does not make you guess. Like he doesn't keep you guessing. He tells you ahead of time what's going to happen. It's whether or not you want to listen to him or whether or not you want to obey. But anyway, so he told Paul during this one particular time, you're going to get shipwrecked. This is what's going to happen. This is what I need you to do. You're going to land on this island. This is what I want to happen, blah, blah, blah. Well, Paul, everything went the way that God said it was going to. Paul was not surprised. They get to the island and they start looking for wood. And so, because they were going to build a fire because they were cold and tired and all that stuff. And so he reached into this wood pile and he pulled out a viper, and the viper bit him. And Paul was so focused on what God had told him he needed to do that Paul shook the viper off, the snake. It was a poisonous snake. For those who don't know what a viper is, I didn't necessarily know that at first a long time ago. So if you're reading and you are listening and you don't know what a viper is, it's a snake, a poisonous snake. And so all of the people are watching and wonder, waiting for him to keel over and die. But let's go. We got stuff to do, people. He's like, you're wasting time type of a thing. So like he knew his mission. He was on point and he didn't let anything distract him. I almost kind of feel, and I don't think it says this in the Bible. Maybe it does. But I almost kind of feel like he was like, I wasted so much time earlier in life chasing after the wrong things that I got a lot to make up for. So I don't have time for, if you're not going to be part of the program or part of the solution, then you need to get out of the way because I got stuff to do, places to go. I got a God to take care of and a God to serve. Not that he had to take care of God, but I mean, he has a God to serve, a mission that God wanted him to do. And so I just kind of, I don't know, I have a lot of respect for Paul. Like I said, there's a little bit of me that is intimidated by Paul. But the more I read about him and the more that I study him, and he just honest to goodnessly loved people. And he didn't want anyone else to go through what he went through of not having that relationship with God. And God used him, like it said in Acts 9, God used him mightily to speak the truth, to speak the God's truth to the Gentiles. And that is what a key component, even though he was a Jew himself, he was a key component for the gospel being spread to the Gentile people. And if it wasn't for Paul, I would not necessarily be a believer because I'm a Gentile and I would not have necessarily heard or had the opportunity to become a believer. So thank you, Paul.
And you know what? I want to piggyback on something you said earlier, how he was bit by a snake and everyone was sitting there waiting for him to keel over and die. He lived, right? He lived. He did not die. But it just made me wonder, in our Christian journeys, how many times have people thought we were down and out and we were about to kill over? Right? Not necessarily physically, but they didn't expect for us to rebound after that job loss or after the loss of a loved one. They just thought we were down and out, or, we lost our homes, or, cars were taken, or, careers were shattered and or destroyed. Things like that, when people just really counted you out and they were just waiting for you to kill over and be like, I'm done. I'm giving up the faith. I thought God was going to see me through this. He didn't, you just kind of just take to your bed and never get out. And they were just sitting there just waiting for him to kill over. But he was so focused on what he was doing that it didn't even bother him. It didn't even bother him. And to me, that's just another reason why I just admire his tenacity so much and his passion so much, because it teaches us that as long as we stay focused on God, we're going to be all right. We're going to survive, even when the enemy fires fiery darts our way. Even when we get bit by quote-unquote poisonous, toxic snakes. And everyone else thinking, well, they're done for. Oh, that's it. They done been through a lot, but they're not going to come out of this one, you know. And God's just like, oh yeah, kind of reminds me of Job when Satan was like, oh well, that's only because you bless him. You take away his blessings, and he's not going to be that way. Do you see what I'm saying? They were just waiting. Him, his friends, and everyone else was. His wife even said, "Why don't you just curse God and die?"
Right?
Right? Because there was just no, everyone had counted him out, but God. And somehow, intuitively, spiritually, I should say, Paul knew that. He knew it. He knew. He just knew, and he just stayed focused on what he knew. And I'm sorry, Cher, I just went off on a rant.
No, you didn't go off on a rant at all. I want to actually piggyback on that and say, and God, okay, so God created Paul with the personality that he did because he knew the mission that he had for him. He also knew that Paul would eventually become a believer. He knew that Paul would do the great things that he called Paul to do. But he also used Paul's time. So I don't think that he chose for Saul, pre-Paul days. I don't think he chose for Saul to be a Sanhedrin and to kill Stephen and to be a part of all of that. But he knew that Saul was going to. And he used that time in his life for good. So it goes back to Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Paul was absolutely 100% called according to God's purpose. And he used all that training that Paul got when he was Saul, before he became Paul and before the conversion. So I don't think it was part of God's plan for him to not be a believer. And I don't think it was part of God's plan for Stephen to die at the hands of Paul. But God used all of that. And he used that period of time, that training in his life for good, so that when he became a believer, he already had all that knowledge. He didn't have to then spend 20 years learning the Torah, learning the books of the Bible. He knew it, so he was able to jumpstart his ministry. Right away. And so God is doing the same thing for us. So where are you in your life? Or let's say that you have lived a life far from God, and all of a sudden you have become a believer. What in your past is God going to use, or has he used, to prepare you for the plan and the mission and the purpose and the destiny that he put in your heart when he formed you in your mother's womb? God, that is the kind of God that we serve. That is the God that we serve, not just the kind, but that is the God we serve. He takes everything, every circumstance, every instance, every experience,
everything that the enemy meant for bad.
Exactly, and he uses it for good. And that, I think, is a great way to end on our note today, because only God. So if you are Stephen and you are being martyred, whether physically or whether bullied or threatened or persecuted at work, remember, God is right there with you. You are not dealing with it alone. Look up and ask God to show himself to you. Ask him how he is going to rescue you. Sometimes the rescuing means you go to heaven, meaning he'll take you out of the situation. Sometimes he'll just provide comfort while you're in it. If you are a Saul and you're running from God, or you want nothing to do with God, but you're wondering after talking today or listening to the podcast today, is God really real? Does he do stuff like that in 2024 like he did, way back when? Have a conversation with him. I'm challenging you to have a conversation and ask God to show himself to you, show himself real to you. And if you are Paul and you have, maybe you've grown up in the church your whole life, maybe you've never had a conversion story, but you've just always had a heart for God. One, kudos to you, because God can use God uses everybody. He uses the people who have gone astray and come back. He uses the people who have chosen to never go astray and to just stay on the straight and narrow and just develop their relationship with him. But ask God too. Say, what is it that you want me to do? And how do you want to use my life? What in my past training are you going to use for your good? And show me how you want me to do that. Or how are you preparing me? What do you have me in currently that you're going to use for your good and use for your service down the road? So, I mean, Paul, I hope that we got you excited about him and that you're ready to read about him yourself, because Paul is so complex and there is so much about him. He has written so many books of the New Testament that it would take many, many, many episodes to cover all of Paul. But as we talk,
and then we will even be touching on it. That's just the beginning.
Exactly. And so, like we've always said in the past, we just want to get you excited to learn about these biblical figures for yourself. So drop us a comment in a email, cheeruppodcast@gmail.com, if you want to let us know what your thoughts are about the podcast today. Or feel free to start a conversation in the Facebook group, Cheer Up Podcast on Facebook. Also, we were talking at the beginning of the episode today that if you are interested and you would want one of us to be a part of the book club, email us at cheeruppodcast@gmail.com. We would absolutely love to join one of your group nights, whether it's the first one, the last one in the middle, whatever it is. We would love to do that. So if you want to feature one of our books, feel free to email us and we'll go from there. Check out Kara's website, kararhunt.com. And remember, her books are all in audiobook as well. So if you like audiobooks versus reading the books yourself, Paper Dolls, all of them are in audiobook, which is amazing, completely awesome. If you want to check out the membership to grow your relationship with God, Jesus in the Everyday, that's over on my website. We both actually also have YouTube channels. If you want to check those out, those are on our website. So kararhunt.com and sherryswalwell.com. And yeah, John 16:33 says, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." I think that Paul is a really great example of finding his peace in God despite all of the trials and the tribulations that he faced in this world. Because he most certainly didn't start facing major trials and tribulations, it seems, until he became a believer. So from the outside worldly perspective, it looks as though he did worse in life once he chose to accept Jesus. But we all know that the suffering that happens on this earth is temporary compared to the eternal glory that we have up in heaven with God. And just like God was with Stephen when he was being martyred, God was with Paul when he was suffering as well. So don't think that just because Paul had martyred or had been a part of martyring Stephen, that he was going to ignore him and not comfort him or be with him when he himself was being tortured and flogged and all of those things that 1 Corinthians 11:23 through 20. Let me make sure I got that right for you. I wrote it down. 1 second. Sorry, I lost my paper, but it was 2 Corinthians 11, I think 23 through 27. God was with Paul just as much as he was with Stephen, because God is with all of his children. And God was paying attention to and calling Saul even when he was running from his purpose and his destiny that God had originally given him. So remember that too. I want to give you that encouragement as well, that God loves us all so much that he doesn't want anyone to not be a believer, to not have a relationship with him. He wants all of us to have a relationship with him, a true godly relationship. So I hope that our talk about Paul today was very encouraging, and we would really love to hear your thoughts on Paul and also on what we talked about today. So drop us an email, start a conversation in the Facebook group, and next week we're going to talk about Barnabas, who is known as the Encourager. And I'm excited to hear what Kara's going to tell us about Barnabas. So have a great rest of your day today. Have a great week, and we will talk to you next week.